The award didn't arrive with a formal presentation. It came as an email at 2 a.m. The subject line, a sterile string of capital letters. Grant awarded. Neural plasticity research. Dr. Anha blinked at the glowing screen, the fluorescent light of the lab washing over her face. She was exhausted, a deep 3-year kind of exhaustion. But that fatigue was instantly burned away by a surge of pure intellectual triumph. It was the Daedalus Foundation grant, the most competitive in their field, and it meant her life's work on neural pathway regeneration could finally move from theory to clinical trial. She exhaled a quiet, fierce breath, a small sound in the vast silence of the empty Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience. This was it. The moment she had worked for, sacrificed for, lived for. 35 years old, brilliant and untouchable. And Ha pushed her chair back, meaning to walk down the hallway to the ultraviolet freezer where her cell cultures waited, a small, unnecessary pilgrimage to the source of her success. As she rose, a sudden burst of white light flared behind her right eye, sharp as a shard of ice. It lasted less than a second, but it stole her balance. She stumbled, gripping the edge of the stainless steel workbench. Fatigue, her mind supplied immediately. Dehydration. Too much coffee. She was a scientist. Every imperfection of the body had a logical, measurable cause. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, grounding herself. As she walked, she felt a subtle, disquieting disconnection. The polished concrete floor seemed to shift beneath her feet, faintly, like standing on a dock in a quiet harbor. The sensation passed, but it left a cold fingerprint on her normally perfect equilibrium. Ridiculous, she muttered, brushing off the brief dizziness. She stretched. The tension in her neck was a tight, familiar knot. Anha opened the freezer. The blast of cold numbed her cheeks. Reaching for the insulated box of samples, her fingers touched the smooth metal handle, and then her hand began to tremble. It wasn't a nervous tremor. It was fast, irregular, a small, localized earthquake in her dominant hand. Too quick, too involuntary to be simple fatigue. She stared at it, Dr. Anha, the rational mind, watching her own hand betray her. She snapped her wrist sharply, forcing the tremor to stop. It obeyed, vanishing as swiftly as it had appeared. She held her hand out, utterly still, strong, controlled. Stress, she categorized, her internal diagnostic engine humming, sympathetic nervous system overload, grant anxiety. She managed a professional, chilly smile, lifting the sample box. The sense of total control returned. She was Dr. Anne, the decipherer of the body's codes, not the one whose code was being deciphered. But as she walked the short distance back to her workstation, her mind, the engine of her entire existence, offered a single rebellious thought, cold as steel. What if I'm wrong? She gripped the box tighter, the plastic edges pressing into her palms. She didn't have time to be wrong. Not now. Not when she finally held the golden key to the future. The tremor, the dizziness, they would be dealt with later, after the breakthrough. She sat down, pulled the keyboard close, and the harsh glow of the monitor lit the first seeds of a slow, terrible, and irreversible unraveling. Trial. The symptoms refused to stay confined within the neat category of stress that Anha had assigned them. They were like small, stubborn marsupials, constantly gnawing at the foundations of the logical house she had built. The tremor was no longer a fleeting event at 2 a.m. It began to appear in daylight, especially when she was deeply focused. The electron microscope, once an effortless extension of her vision, had turned into an instrument of torture. Once, while trying to steady her hand to inject a microliter of solution into a culture tube, the needle slipped violently. The entire stem cell sample, 3 weeks of research, was destroyed. She straightened, cold sweat slick on her palms, but her face remained an expressionless mask of composure. Dr. Anha, are you all right? A young research assistant named Trung asked cautiously. I'm fine, she replied, her voice sharp and metallic. Just a bit of sleep deprivation. Prepare the samples again. This time I'll supervise verbally. Anha, the scientist who had always taken pride in the absolute precision of her hands, now had to direct from a distance, like a general forced to observe the battlefield through binoculars. Her control had slipped from the molecular level to the macroscopic, and she despised it. When the doctor becomes the patient, denial was a powerful defense mechanism. But Anha knew its physiology all too well. After 2 weeks of enduring intensifying dizziness, feeling as if she were walking on a waterbed instead of solid ground, she was finally forced to examine herself. She didn't go to the public hospital where she had once worked and been respected. She didn't want pitying looks, or worse, curious ones from former colleagues. Instead, she went to a private clinic, used a false name, and pretended to be an out-of-town patient. Anha ran the basic tests herself. She didn't need a general practitioner to interpret the results. Slightly slowed nerve conduction, exaggerated deep tendon reflexes in several limbs, and a few irregularities in her complete blood count. Impossible, she thought. Her hand, steady now, scribbled a long list of potential diagnoses, all mild, all treatable. Mild neuritis, vitamin B12 deficiency, complex migraine. The search for a diagnosis. The quest for a diagnosis turned into a 4-month medical nightmare. Anha found herself inhabiting the passive role of a patient. Endless waiting, being passed from one neurologist to another immunologist. Each specialist offered a different hypothesis, always cautious, always uncertain. It could be early onset multiple sclerosis, one doctor said, frowning at the MRI scan of her brain. The antibody markers don't completely match. Howlers, have you experienced any severe stress in the past? Another asked. To Anha, every appointment was an insult. She wanted to scream, I wrote the papers you're reading. Don't talk to me about stress. Talk to me about my myelin sheath. She stopped sleeping altogether. The greatest Christmas gift of her life, the dataless grant, now lay untouched on her desk, the paperwork unsigned, her work suspended. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon. Hongmin, her partner, a patient, even-tempered architect, was trying to cook dinner when he heard her shouting from the study. He ran in. She was kneeling by the bookshelf, trying to reassemble a plastic spinal model that had shattered. She wasn't crying, she was groaning, a sound rawer, more primal than tears. They can't find it, Min. They can't name it. They don't know what to treat. It's eating me alive, from the inside, piece by piece. Hongmin knelt beside her, wrapped his arms around her, and said nothing. A few days later, she received a call from the department head. His voice was heavy, stripped of the usual professional optimism. They had sent her nerve biopsy to a specialized laboratory overseas. Dr. Anha, he said, we have an answer. You have myelinolysis syndrome, MSX. It's a rare, extremely aggressive autoimmune disorder that attacks the myelin sheaths in the central nervous system. It's very difficult to control. The name. At last, it had a name. But the name brought no clarity, only a sentence. She, a neuroscientist, now carried within her a disease with no definitive cure, an invisible enemy stripping away the very thing she cherished most, her brain's control over her body. Clutching the phone, Anha looked out the window where an ambulance wailed past. She had officially entered a new world, the world of the sick, a world from which, with all her intellect and knowledge, she could not escape. The name and the sentence. The name myelinolysis syndrome, MSX, brought clarity, but no comfort. Anha locked herself in her office for 2 days. She didn't cry. Instead, she did what she did best. She researched. With all of her own clinical data in hand, she dove into the global medical archives, tracing every study, every clinical trial, every case report ever written about MSX. Each paper was another knife. Prognosis often leads to rapid motor and cognitive decline. Treatment. Immunomodulatory therapies may slow progression but do not cure. Mortality rate, significantly higher than in typical forms of MS. She, Dr. Anha, who had dedicated her life to finding solutions, now faced the one conclusion all her knowledge led to: there was no solution. Her mind was a supercomputer running a failed algorithm. She couldn't accept the absurdity. If her immune system was attacking her, where was the logic? Where was the control? The anger that surged wasn't emotional. It was intellectual fury. She slammed her hand on the table, making the syringes on its surface rattle. Impossible, she hissed. There has to be another cellular synthesis pathway, some receptor inhibitor they missed. She began constructing experimental models in her mind, searching for errors in the world's leading research. But every time she tried to write out an equation, the tremor in her hand returned, turning the intricate chemical symbols into meaningless smears of ink. The disease wasn't just attacking her nervous system, it was attacking her very identity. 2. The collapse of the scientist. The dataless grant still sat on her desk, unsigned. Her inbox overflowed with congratulations and interview requests, the life she had defined for herself. The life of someone destined to change the future of medicine was waiting. But when Anha looked at her laboratory, once her sanctuary, she saw it as a glass coffin. She could no longer work there. Her field demanded absolute precision. There was no room for slips, for unannounced tremors. She buried her face in her arms and felt the damp warmth of the last tears her reason would allow. Her final act as a leading researcher was to write a short, cold email to the Institute director. Subject, resignation. Dear Director, I am writing to formally resign from my position as head of the Neural Research Division and to decline the Daedalus grant. My current health condition does not allow me to continue conducting research at the highest standard. I will transfer all relevant documentation to Dr. Tran within the week. Sincerely, Dr. Anha. That was all. No explanation, no lamentation, a clean severance. In this way, she preserved one last fragment of control. She chose to leave before she was forced to. 3. The cold mark of steel. The greatest loss was not her career or prestige, but her faith in her own body. A week after her official resignation, Anha was standing in the kitchen. Hongming was at work. She wanted to do something normal, something simple. Pour herself a glass of water. She gripped the glass jug, willing her wrist and arm to stay steady. She summoned all the intelligence that had once solved the most complex mysteries of the human nervous system and focused it on this single mundane task. Engage the deltoids, activate the biceps, maintain wrist alignment, coordinate vision and movement. She began to pour. Water streamed smoothly, then halfway through, her body rebelled. A sudden spasm shot down her arm. The jug tilted abruptly, spilling water across the counter and floor. It slipped from her grasp and shattered, exploding into 100 pieces on the tile. Anha stared, breathing hard. It wasn't an accident. It was confirmation. Her body was no longer the instrument of her mind. It was the enemy, a broken machine the most brilliant engineer could not repair. She didn't move. She didn't pick up the shards. Her eyes fixed on the glittering fragments on the floor, reflecting the harsh light from the window. In those jagged pieces, she saw a distorted reflection of herself, a great mind imprisoned in a decaying shell of flesh. Despair was no longer a violent emotion. It was a static state of being, cold and clinical, like the steady temperature of an ultraviolet freezer. Dr. Anha was gone. Only Anha, the patient, remained, waiting for the next stage of her disease. She limped to the bedroom, where she often curled beneath the blanket and whispered a single wish into the darkness. The end.